ワンピースは実在する。
俺はモンキー D ルフィ、お前らを超えて海賊王になる男だ。
人の夢は終わらねえ。
Welcome
to Nerdville.
We'll never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. We must be cautious.
Hey guys, Fanfi here. I'm currently not in my home country. I'm in a hotel. There's also other people here, so I'm not going to be speaking very loudly. turtlz, take it away.
All right, so Merry Christmas to everybody. Let's start by that, and and let's get into that chapter 1102 of One Piece. I mean, it feels like the conclusion to Kuma, finally.
Oh yeah, finally, right?
I mean, we all love Oda, and we all love how dedicated he is to the stories and how in depth he puts them. But we all want to see what happens in Egghead right now, right?
Yeah,
so,
for sure. I mean, this is a breath of fresh air in comparison to what we got with Kaido's backstory, right? Like,
well, I think Kaido is probably the worst backstory we've had in One Piece ever.
Oh yeah,
by far.
Yeah. I mean, let's just start with, what we said with last chapter about, we were talking about Kuma's free will and whether he still had any. Well, it at least seems pretty clear in this chapter that by the time Marineford, came around, that Kuma's will was completely removed. What we see right now happening in Marijois, right, might be just him malfunctioning, or a product of what Vegapunk said he was trying to achieve, right, by splitting his personality into two parts, right? But let's get into what we saw from Kuma, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the part that we were right about is we did mention previously that we didn't really know why he stayed to protect the Straw Hat crew, and we were wondering if it was his will or if it was something programmed in him, and that was confirmed that he did ask that to Vegapunk, and that just proves to us, and the story, as we see the conclusion to the story, really shows you how much he believes in Luffy, even not knowing Luffy, if you think about it. And
yeah, for sure. I mean, he's been kind of spying on him, right? But yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not just spying on him because he's Dragon's son, but also because he's doing things that are unexpected. He mentions it, like punching a celestial dragon and declaring war on the world government. That's Nika-esque.
I mean, I think it's at that moment. Yeah, it's really at that moment where he really he had his small suspicions before, but there it really clarified things for him that this guy might be the closest thing, right, to Nika that he can find in the real world, not in religion or stuff like that. So
well, I think
that
the best,
definitely
yeah, I think the best way to put it would be that Kuma doesn't believe that Luffy is Nika, but he thinks he's the closest
not necessarily
thing, but he's the closest thing to Nika according to him.
For sure.
And I think the only reason why he doesn't believe he is like Nika himself is just because he knows his dragon's son. I think if he wasn't related to Dragon, he might have a different perspective on it.
I mean, as you said when we were discussing the chapter last time, devil fruits come in all types of form. It could be that there's another fruit that gives you rubbery body, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that he is confirmed that he's Nika because he has a rubber fruit, right? Like it's not that One Piece doesn't work that way. We have lots of fruits that fall under similar categories, right? So it definitely feels like he like you said, he feels like it's the closest thing, right? And again, what we saw with Zoro and Luffy's crew protecting him, how they want to protect him, and what happened with Sabaody, right? Very interesting. And the fact that Kuma, right, when all this is happening, he has his will. He's not some mindless cyborg. You see him thinking in the back of his mind, like even when he's giving Zoro the bubble, he's like, wow, I don't even know if I could take this much damage. Well, he probably could, right? But like he said, like, I don't know if I could stay conscious, right? That's so much pain to take, right? So all of that just reinforces what he already slightly suspected when he saw Dragon's son, right?
Exactly.
All right. Well, I mean, apart from I think we got everything we needed from Kuma's backstory, as you said, apart from understanding why he's malfunctioning. But I think that will be answered in present day, maybe through the revolutionaries or Saturn potentially, who, as we see in this chapter, is supposed to have a means to deal with Kuma, right? If he goes off the rails.
Yeah, they have that you ask for that self-destruct button, but clearly, or there's two options for us that are possible. It's one, he just malfunctions and they just want to see if they can get him back before, blowing him up. Or Vegapunk went against Saturn and just didn't do it, or he did it, but it's not functional. Maybe it's just a button, that doesn't work. That's another possibility, because we've seen that Vegapunk is so torn about what's about to happen. He's devastated at the end of the chapter, and that's another point that he makes. He's talking about that split personality part, as you mentioned previously, and that is another possibility of what's happening to Kuma, that Vegapunk went against what Saturn wanted because he just didn't feel it was right. And that leads us to one of the most badass lines, I think, of this chapter, and just in general, is Saturn mentioning that he's a scientist as well, and that he will know if Vegapunk doesn't do what he's supposed to do. Just putting
which
his
is
foot down.
weird, since, how would he not know if it, or that's just like an empty threat in a way, like...
Maybe he wouldn't figure it out as fast, but
Vegapunk didn't go through.
But maybe just telling Vegapunk, he's saying, like, I might not figuring it out immediately, but I will figure it out eventually. And so you better not do it.
This is 2 years ago, right? It's not like 10 years ago or whatever. So it is recent in One Piece history. So yeah, I guess there's that, that idea as well, that he didn't need to try it out, right? He just thought that the threat maybe was enough. And we've seen that the Gorosei, they're not the most prudent people, so they're bound to make mistakes, even with him saying something so badass like that, right? Like, I'm a scientist too, right?
And talking about badass characters, I think this story was more than just Kuma, because we got Bonney, we got a little bit of how the Straw Hats, but we also get a lot of information on Dragon. And my opinion on Dragon has slightly changed. We weren't sure about the type of parent he was, and clearly he's a great parent, actually. Understanding who he is.
Own way.
But you understand who he is and the risk he incurs for people that are around him, so he separated himself from Luffy that way to give him the freedom, right? But not only that, we see that once he's going to go to Lockdown, after his first bounty, Dragon asks who's in charge of Lockdown before making a move. And I think it's just because he realizes, being maybe part of the Marines, that Smoker is a danger, and that if he doesn't show up, Luffy, that might be the end for Luffy. Which,
he knows that, maybe he knows that, Smoker is part of the, Garp line of succession of some sort, like he's the revolution who was Garp's apprentice, right? Like,
he's in charge of the revolutionaries. He would know more, like all the vice admirals and
for sure,
he would have all that info. He just needs to know who's in, like, he just needs a reminder of who is where, right? And also, we always thought, I always thought that at Lockdown, it was not like luck, but it felt like, a little bit of, it's just a coincidence, right? And clearly it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was intended for him to show up that way. And also, for everybody listening, if you can tell us in the comments what you think. We all remember the lightning hitting Luffy when he's about to get executed. And there's suspicions out there that Dragon might have something to do with manipulating weather in a way. So did Dragon, knowing that Luffy is immune to lightning, shoot a lightning bolt where he was to save his life? And so an event that looks like destiny and, it was just meant to be, was just not that. It was a father protecting his son.
Yeah, which goes in line with, what we've seen from him, that, he actually does care for Luffy. He goes out of his way to leave his post, right, to protect his son, because he knows that, could be potentially in danger, right? Like, and maybe to see, like, this after his big bounty reveal, so now he's becoming a big deal, right? So that's the moment where he kind of needs to swoop in to, defend him, right?
For sure. Talking about the Luffy line, Jinbei and Ace seem way closer than we thought. Like, I thought they really got close in prison. Like, we know that they interacted before, but I thought it was really an Impel Down. And it's just not the reality of how it was. They were hanging out. We've seen it multiple times now through that backstory.
From what I thought is that it was respect, right? Since Ace was the one who defeated Jinbei, so there was a good amount of respect there. So, but yeah, it does seem like they were much closer than we originally thought, right? Like we saw it even last chapter, right? Like they're kind of chummy, right? Like poking at each other, like was saying, oh, like just talking something about the warlords, right? And about him, Kuma taking his position, and Jinbei was like, should you really be mentioning that to me right now? Like, it was pretty funny, yeah. I mean, I think the biggest, thing about this chapter for me is, Bonney saying that she wants to meet Nika after having, met her father again, because that is a big deal for her. And like we said last chapter, right? It's a big part of how she was raised by,
it's
Kuma,
not only that, like she
dancing to
wants,
the beat of the Nika drums and all that, right? Like,
as she says it, like she was like, imagine if I could find Nika and like tell my dad. It's not even just about like,
yeah,
she wants to like freak him out in a way, but that's like, in a way, that's a 10-year-old's dream too, right?
yeah, show up her father in a way, right? Like, and also she says that she wants to meet him for sure, but from what we see at the end of the chapter, right? Like, or towards the end of the chapter, we see, a brief summary version of Kuma's backstory, kind of like it's Kuma's Kaido backstory, right? Like the short snippets, a montage of images that are, what we've seen so far in the past few chapters, and leading into an image of Bonney crying, right? And the last time we saw that sequence was when Bonney, attacked Vegapunk and broke into his lab and found Kuma's memories. But when she went into the bubble, it seemed like, at least from what we saw, that she could, like, what she saw was him beaten down by other slaves in God Valley, right? That moment where right before Eva and Ginny show up, right? But it didn't feel like she saw the entire backstory. It's that she saw some snippets and she got so overwhelmed by, the atrocities that he had to suffer through that she, bowed out and jumped out of the bubble. But maybe Oda, for continuity's sake, right, to not, spoil anything or whatever, kind of, cut through it. Like she was crying and it seemed like she couldn't take it, but she jumped out at the end, right? But it also begs the question as to why she, didn't, kind of confront Luffy about it in a way. Like she didn't, or have her seeing the Tier 5. I mean, does she know at this point that Luffy is Nika? It's quite unclear because
she's a child.
Didn't see,
she might not
she's,
put into together.
She's definitely a child, but no, for sure. But we did see, like, there is another point into the fact that she did see the entire backstory, is that she changed her mind about Vegapunk. That after she saw the memories, she told Kizaru that Vegapunk wasn't the person she was trying to vent her anger against anymore. And that person, well, we saw in chapter 1094 and 95 was Saturn, right? So how would she know that if she hadn't seen the backstory, the entire backstory, right? So there's some things that, are unclear. I don't think they don't make sense, right? But they're a bit unclear. Again, maybe this was Oda trying to, spare us the spoilers in a way or whatever. I mean, another thing that we saw in this chapter, apart, from Bonney potentially knowing that Luffy is Nika already, right, without necessarily seeing it. And again, I mean, Bonney, from just interacting with Luffy as an individual and probably hearing the Nika drums at one point when he's like maybe waking up, right, to save her from Saturn or whatever. Like the drums might wake him up, right, and she might hear it. But just from spending time with him and knowing about his personality and the fact that he's made of rubber and all that, could point her into that direction anyways, right? But going back to, what we saw with Vegapunk, having to, shut off Kuma's mind, that was a really hard scene to watch, right? Like, as you said previously, he was completely devastated by that. And not only him, but every single person on Egghead who got to know him as a person. Even him, Vegapunk says, like, this isn't like the Straw Hats and Bonney aren't your only legacy. Everyone here knows that you're a hero, right? That everyone respects him.
Not only that,
and I think, like, if Kizaru was there, he would have been, as well, yeah. Even Kizaru, if he were there, would have been maybe not crying, but he would have been touched, right?
He would have been upset, I think, about how things are working out. Because we know that the Marines values are not exactly in line with celestial dragon values. They are enforcers for the celestial dragons, but they don't agree with them on the basic principles of how they want to, you know, treat general populations.
For sure. No, for sure. It's really it was a very sad backstory for sure. Especially the end, how it's, you know, we end in tragedy, right? Where in Kuma's backstory we kind of had a roller coaster of sadness and happiness, right? Kind of chapter by chapter in a way, or every 2 chapters, you know. And it was, I think it's definitely one of the saddest backstories in One Piece because it's so, you know, tangible, like, you know, a father and a daughter, right? Like the story of him losing the person that he loves and all. It's all very very tangible and relatable, right? As opposed to something absolutely crazy, right? That can't, you know, really be something that's related. I mean, turning into a cyborg isn't really relatable, right? But you know what I mean, like the whole like becoming a slave again and all that, like to the people that you're supposedly trying to fight against, right? So it was I'd say it's one of my favorite backstories in One Piece. It's not that long either, like it was pretty short-lived, like 7 chapters, I think. It's a decent one, and I think the most important part is it closes a lot of the gaps in information that we had throughout the story, because all of us as One Piece fans, when we're following, right, we know that as you go through the story, you're like, I don't get this and I don't get that, or this is missing, I need more info on that. And I think that backstory really like gave us a better perspective. And tied between events of the stories, right, and tied with the beginning of the East Blue Saga, right, which was great as well. But yeah, I think this is the conclusion of the backstory. Definitely at this point, like there's again, like we've said this many times and we're wrong, right? But I can, and probably also with what, you know, Oda said in Jump Festa, which we'll do a video on shortly at one point, like in the next few days. Again, I'd like to apologize to, you know, people actually watch us, but you know, we're not going to be doing another, you know, classic One Piece review because I'm away on business in another country, and turtlz is currently busy with personal stuff. But you know, we'll be back, and we will also be releasing a full Kuma backstory with all the events that have transpired. So look forward to that.
All right.
And yeah, it was fun, right?
Yep. All right. Have a Merry Christmas, guys, and
yeah, Merry Christmas.
See you next time.